We have Yiaga Africa. They have warned against the call for the abolition of state independent electoral commissions and transferring their duties to the Independent National Electoral Commission. Well, in a statement by the executive director of Yiaga Africa, Samson Itodo, he said such a move would overstretch the commission and undermine the autonomy of the states. The Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice, Lateef Fagbemi, had in May called for the scrapping of state electoral commissions. According to him, governors have abused the rights of local governments by using the state electoral commissions to impose leaders on them through sham elections. Well, we will be having a conversation with the founder of Yiaga Africa, Samson Itodo, who will be discussing the challenges and opportunities such a system could present. Good to have you on Newsday. All right, and just as we were speaking about before, we have the founder of Yiaga Africa, Samson Itodo, who's going to be joining us now. Thank you so much for joining us. We are going to be talking about the challenges that this within the system could create. Thank you for joining us, Samson. Always good to have you. So why should state electoral commissions not be scrapped? What could be the immediate consequences from that?
Well, thank you very much. At Yiaga Africa, it's our considered and principled position that the proposal for the scrapping or abolition of SECs and State Independent Electoral Commission is fundamentally flawed because of the consequence it has for, one, our democratic institution, two, our democratic culture, but also the future of local governance. Because as a country, 25 years of democratic expedition, we are at a point where we need to renegotiate a new citizens' compact. And it's a citizens' compact that devolves power to the component units, the subnational units, and give them the autonomy which democracy actually conceptualizes so they can advance their own development. We cannot be advocating for local government autonomy on one hand and also be demanding for centralization of power on the other hand, knowing fully well that the bane of our problems have always been the centralization of power. And this is why we have argued that to advance decentralization and devolution of power, it is important to protect the autonomy of states, to legislate and conduct local council elections. The second dimension on why SECs should be retained is the impact that it will have on the Electoral Commission. On one hand, INEC as an institution, have admitted that it has enormous responsibilities vested on the Commission and it is unable to discharge all the responsibilities diligently. And one of them is the prosecution of electoral offenses. Because when people talk about elections, elections aren't just about what happens on election day. There are several pre-election, during and post-election activities and responsibilities that INEC needs to conduct. INEC cannot have told Nigerians that it's overburdened. Justice Uwe's committee's report was clear that there was need to unbundle INEC. That's why there's a clamor for the Electoral Offenses Commission. We cannot vest the responsibility of conducting local council elections on the same Electoral Commission that is overburdened. What we would have is a lot of administrative inefficiencies. We will be dealing with poor quality elections. And so to protect INEC and not overstretch the Electoral Commission, we cannot transfer that responsibility on INEC to conduct local council elections. But also, why SECs need to be retained. I think the biggest issue here is not the scrapping of SECs, is what is the reason why SECs have been so disempowered, from discharging their constitutional mandate. And there are three reasons that account for this. The first, there is a gap within the Constitution that does not explicitly provides for the term or the tenure of office of local government councils. Yes, the Constitution says local government, shall be administered by democratically elected councils, but it never stipulates the term for office. So there is a gap in the Constitution that needs to be addressed. The second is to protect the financial independence of state independent electoral commission. INEC is where it is today because there was intense advocacy for protecting the financial independence of INEC. That's why INEC is funded from the consolidated revenue of the Federation. In other words, INEC is funded from the first line charge. That needs to be extended to the state houses of state electoral commissions to protect their independence, to prevent governors, from undermining those state independent electoral commissions. Because what you currently have at the state is a situation where governors instrumentalize their overbearing powers and they assault not just the independence of the state independent electoral commissions, but they make them so powerless that they cannot deliver credible local council elections.
All right, then you've, rightfully answered my colleague's question when we look at the impact on INEC. But I want us to talk about state autonomy as well as local democracy. How does the abolition of these state independent electoral commissions undermine the constitutional principle of this state autonomy, and what long-term effects would this have on Nigeria's federal structure? You also mentioned that centralizing local government elections under INEC could weaken local democracy. How can you explain how this might reduce citizen participation as well as the decision making on a democratic level in the local space?
We are a constitutional democracy. And a constitutional democracy is bound by the dictates of the Constitution. And the Constitution is clear that governmental powers are shared between the federal, the state, as well as the local governments. Now, in the exclusive legislative list, the federal government has exclusive powers to legislate on matters contained in the exclusive legislative list. On the concurrent list, right, you have powers that are vested within states. And in this particular instance, the reason why you share power is to make the component unit, the subnational units, able to administer their affairs. There's the whole principle of autonomy that enhances the quality of democracy, that gives people the opportunity to participate in in administering their local affairs. I don't understand why the federal government should be involved in state affairs, in administering state affairs. And so when we think about devolution of powers, it is important to understand and appreciate that one way to address the national question, one way to promote national integration, one way to promote popular participation in local governance and in democracy is to devolve power to the states so the states can administer their affairs whilst they're still part of this federation that we call Nigeria. That's one. The second point is if the federal government begins to legislate on every matter related to elections at the state, it will be considered a federal affair, not necessarily a state affair. And people would not have the opportunity, to participate. Now, the fact that people are clamoring for the scrapping of state legislature does not mean, the reasons are not understandable. They are understandable. But the question is the solution scrapping sex? My answer is no. The solution doesn't rest in scrapping sex. It rests in doing and taking the decisions and the actions that we need to take to first answer the question of independence. There's an independence question that we have not answered because the state independent electoral commissions are not independent of the control of the executive at the state level. The second is also about citizens' participation. that will it give citizens the opportunity at the state level to participate? And I made this argument earlier that if INEC is conducting, state local council election, although it's even inconceivable because of the logistical challenges that it involves, I think that when you look at how states are structured and the time frame for conducting their elections, if we protect not just the independence, but also the term of office of local government, and then the financial independence, backed with political education and mobilization, then we can elicit the interest of citizens to participating in local council elections. But at this point, we are not encouraging people at the local level to think about governance at the local level, because everyone is focused on what's happening at the federal level, and no one is paying attention to what is happening at the state and at the local government level. Those are the issues we need to deal with, including limiting executive interference at the state level, with the powers vested on electoral commissions to conduct elections. Because what we currently have, and I totally agree with the INEC chairman, that what you have at the states is nothing but just coronation, because the governors exercise too much powers that are not limited, are not regulated, or even checked by their state houses of assemblies.
And speaking of those abuses of powers, what's to be made of the argument by the Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice, Lateef Fagbemi, that the governors, of course, the governors in the past, that they've abused these powers, that the IECs to conduct sham elections and impose their own candidates? Is this something that can be circumvented with what they're proposing?
Absolutely, and I think there are mechanisms that can be put in place. First, we've made the argument, and it aligns with popular opinion, that there has to be consequence. For one, the dissolution, the arbitrary dissolution of state independent electoral commissions, including withholding the funds for state independent electoral commissions. If there is no consequence, governors will continue to exploit that gap within our electoral system. And this is where things like federal allocation, the federal government can actually withhold, allocation to states on the basis of certain conditions that are not met, provided they are established in our law. And so if we introduce those kind of regulatory mechanism that keeps the governors in check, it will limit this incursion and assault on the independence of the state independent electoral commissions. That's one. Secondly, I've talked about the need for the Constitution to be explicit on the term of office, of the local government councils. Currently, the term is not clear in the books, in our law books, even though in the 2022 Electoral Act, the National Assembly introduced a provision on Section 150 that makes the procedure for the conduct of local government elections bound by the procedure for the conduct of FCT area council under Part 5 of the 2022 Electoral Act. That is a progressive introduction into our law, but it's not enough. So if the Constitution sets the term of office of local councils, the governors will be bound to respect the Constitution, because if they undermine the provisions of the Constitution, of course, you and I know, it's actually an impeachable offense if you do what? You act ultra-vires or violate provisions of the Constitution. These are some of the mechanisms that can be put in place. But you can put all this in place if the people, the citizens at the local government level, are not fully engaged, are not fully mobilized, are not educated on the role and the power that local governments have in influencing the quality of their lives, then they will not participate in the local council election, because there's no election without people.
Thank you so much, Mr. Samson Itodo, founder of Yiaga. I would have loved to ask you about sanctions for non-compliance, but we've run out of time. We appreciate your analysis and, of course, your contribution to Newsday today. Thank you.